I'm so pleased to have you here, Dr. Jennifer Taylor. Thank you so much for joining us here in Melbourne, all the way from Alice Springs, to talk about the women of Papunya Tula Artists and the beginnings of the women painting in the mid-90s. Mm-hmm. It's so great to have you here. You were working for Papunya Tula between 1994 and 1996, and it's a story that not many people have heard, so welcome and thank you.
Thanks for the invitation, first of all. And yeah, I had recently graduated from the art school in Canberra at ANU in the painting department, and I was rather desperate to get into community art production again and get out of the city. So I packed up and headed I headed north first of all to Kununurra, worked with the woman artists for a short time, and then Papunya Tula advertised for a field worker. So I came and interviewed and then took that job. And then shortly afterwards was asked to step into the manager's position. Why did I come? I'd been sort of immersed in, Western Desert, images of Western Desert art whilst I was at art school, exposure to the Sylvia climate and art theory around Indigenous art. I was really interested in the coming together of land rights movement and visual arts, and looking at how creative arts could actually support people's claims and their groundedness in place. And I could see the importance of visual arts practice for people's well-being, their spiritual well-being and their health. And so it was sort of a fairly broad motivation for me. Mm-hmm. Apart from just the fascination, of course I'd heard of Papunya Tula as this kind of gold standard in terms of art centres that were community-run and community-based and owned by the artists. So that was a key thing. It was a curiosity about how that all worked. And I felt I had something to offer. I knew it was limited because I didn't have language skills or governance skills or financial management skills, but I had a real sense of what painting can do, and of how I might just be present with people and assist with that project. And I was really confident in my sheer enjoyment of painting and of looking at those works, those amazing works, which I'd only seen in reproduction or in the gallery, at the National Gallery at that point. So I just wanted to get closer. Yeah.
And can I the time that you spent in Kununurra, so just the connect between the two, so how much time did you spend there, and what sort of informed, like when you got to Papunya Tula, you already had some experience, so could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So I was working in a private gallery, so it wasn't the Walungurru Arts, and I hadn't realised until then the tensions that existed between private and artist-owned galleries, so that was an education for me. It was a good practice. The gallery was called Ochre Gallery, and it was run by a friend of mine, and I admired the way she worked with artists. So she had some artists coming in, like Rover Thomas was coming in and working in the gallery. Mostly the artists were working at Woman, and so we did trips to Woman to liaise with the artists and to look at the paintings and bring the paintings back. So those were, amazing times, really, so fortunate. So there was like Queen Mackenzie, Mabel Julie, Victor Jardinay, Freddie Timms, those artists. So, and that was my first exposure to, the artists working on country, actually.
So what was the sort of the structure? How was it being, or how was it run, I suppose?
Yeah, so at the time, Faye Bell was manager, and very soon after I arrived, she decided she wanted to resign, so she asked if I would manage, and I thought, I don't have the basic business skills for that, so I said no at first, but then I thought, maybe I can do it. I'd had a good sense of the layout of things and where the artists were living, and had been out on country with Daphne, had that induction with Daphne, so I had a bit of a sense of what was required of me. And I negotiated to work as the manager in a joint role with Janice Stanton, who was the bookkeeper. So I thought, great, she has the financial skills. I have some other skills, and we'd work together as a team. Daphne had retired because of ill health, and then she had come back to the company in a rather undefined role.
Daphne Williams. So she
Sorry,
had been. So Daphne Williams was prior to that. How many? She'd started in the 80s.
Yes,
right?
so she'd been there about 10 years when I arrived. Yeah.
And this was her in between. So she wasn't actually working at the time. She was still involved, but not formally managing the company.
That's right. So she was advising Janice and me, and quite strongly at times. Yeah. And so for me, it was a question of like finding my feet, being very much actually in awe of Daphne, and very grateful for her induction, because she was so trusted by the artists and their families, and a phenomenal memory for family members and connections and sites and stories. And so I felt that there was a real trust between her and the senior men who were the main painters at that time. And that luckily for me, that rubbed off on me a bit. I felt like you're being taken out and introduced, and it's like you're being handed over as someone who's trustworthy. So I hope that that was the case. So Daphne was always kind of on the end of the phone if you were doing field work. And in the gallery, she was there, you know, I forget, part-time as she felt able. I think I benefited also from her strategic mind. You know, she had run the company and it elevated the company in terms of its reputation, and also financially from a fairly shaky position to quite stable. And so she was a great strategic thinker. She was such a strategist and a diplomat, but you could also feel this muscle when she thought that something should happen. She really, that's what happened basically. And so I think there was a sort of mutual respect that we had for each other. She really trusted my eye with paintings, and it was different from hers. I think, for example, mainly works that were a bit rougher or a bit more experimental, I would go for them, and she would be more cautious around them. And that sounds like not much, but actually I think that was crucial. And when putting together shows for other venues, you know, putting together works for exhibition in the gallery at Todd Street, and also to send away, I felt like I was learning on the job to curate, but I think I had a knack for that. So that went quite well, and I worked well with Daphne in that area. And yeah, I think where we would diverge was when I started early in '94, there was quite a lot of sense of financial constraint. And we actually did go through everything in stock and try to find things to sell, which now feels like, oh my God, some beautiful works had to go because we needed to stay afloat. But I think we did recover quite well. And so by the end of '94, the company was fairly buoyant. And I felt at that point that financial constraints shouldn't be the main guiding principle, that there were other, I guess, ideological things or values that needed to come to the fore more. And principally that would be around supporting women.
Because at the time, and even though at the end of '94, as you said, it was coming out of a really hard time. By that stage, a lot of the original founding artists had passed away. Who was painting at the time, and kind of So what was sort of the key artists that were kind of, I guess, holding it together at that time?
Okay. Well, at Papunya there were primarily amateur artists and role-play artists, so Michael Nelson, Paddy Carroll, Long Jack Philippus, Denny Nolan. And then at Wadiwanu, Mount Liebig, there were Lily Kelly and some other women, Petra Nambajimba, Sandra Nambajimba, Fabian Peters. But most of the artists were working in Kintul, Walungurru, and that would be quite a long list. So quite a number of those old men, Charlie Japangadi, George Jungarai, Ronnie Jampajimba, Turkey Tolson, Mick Namarari, Kenny Williams, I've probably forgotten
Oh
some.
no, I'm sure there was a lot, but
and at
supposed
Kiwirrkurra,
to
Anajari was still alive actually. Yeah.
Oh, right.
So we would go between Kinto and Kiwirrkurra. And so it was mostly those older men. And I had a sense that there was a bit of a drop in energy. And I think this was fairly evident in most of the works that would come through. So there was a bit of tension around giving out canvas. Would it actually be exhibition quality, let alone museum quality? Would it be saleable? And so there was a fair bit of this giving of pep talks.
Oh, okay. and Daphne's fierce loyalty to the men.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes.
And
yes.
Meanwhile, the women, which we're coming to now, had been in the wings, I guess.
In the wings, you could say, yeah. In their own minds, I'm not sure how they felt about that, actually. I didn't have the experience of women lobbying me for canvas, but my observations were they were incredibly competent painters already, and that they were working on family canvases, so husbands and fathers, and of course not documented. Undocumented workers, really.
Yes.
So they didn't appear in any of the documentation. That would just be the man's name. And I just, you know, I'm a feminist. I just, in a sense, couldn't abide it to a point when it seemed like we didn't have an option. We had to continue as we were. Okay. But by late 94, I felt like this just doesn't sit well with me. And I think that there were financial constraints were actually masking some other, you know, other sorts of values there.
Yes. Like I guess proven work, like the rough, maybe the looser styles, or like I guess that uncertainty of what the women would be producing as opposed to what the men. So and Daphne's eye not being, I guess, kind of aligned with that.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, the women, like there were outside of Papunya Tula, around the communities, women were painting in their own right.
I know I'm dwelling a bit on what the Papunya Tula women to be were already doing, but they were doing a lot on other people's canvases, but they were also producing other works that kind of get discounted somewhat as craft, you know, but they were exquisite, some of them. So women like Daisy Lira, Nakamara from Alhambra, and other women in Kinto were producing carved and painted boards, you know. Honestly, they're so precious, I think. But anyway, they weren't paid highly. So there was that. And there were women in town like Pansy Napangari, Eunice Napangari, who else in town? There's someone else, who were operating quite independently. So obviously they could. And they were actually, you know, they had travelled for exhibitions even already.
And some quite esteemed Pansy Napangari, so she had exhibitions and so yes, it's not like no women at all were on the books at Papunya Tula prior to 1996.
They were on the books,
but they did have a different way of working. As you said, they were quite independent. They had individual practices. They weren't part of kind of a cohort or.
That's right.
So that is interesting. And their paintings, if you look at them, they look very different to what
from each other.
What the Papunya Tula women.
That's right. Yeah, and so they didn't have that support of studio practice, you know, like collective studio. And they also it was canvas by canvas. It wasn't a sense of we've made a commitment to you.
Yes.
We're really backing you, perhaps with the exception of Pansy. Also, women must have been aware of other women working in the Central Desert area and Western Desert area. Obviously, Emily Kamware, and women painting for Walungurru, women painting at Ikunji, the famous Minmajuku project that the senior women from Kinto had been involved in. So they'd experienced that sort of collective practice and been supported in that. And that was influential, I'm sure, in ways that I didn't hear about directly. So I don't remember women talking to me about that project, but of course we were aware of it. I felt that my focus at the time was on just working with those internal dynamics in the company so that we could get ourselves out of what was going to become a hole if we kept going the way that we were, with the energy falling away a bit, and just open out to other painters who I thought were going to be incredibly exciting and capable, you know. And it was only fair. It just felt like it was only fair. I was thinking back, I don't think I had a strategy for where this is going to go.
Okay.
I just had the feeling like it is going to go woomph, you know, it's going to take off. But what I was driven by more than strategy was a sense of what I call it obligation. It was what was right to do. And it was to do with supporting those relationships. Those women were there. I had a relationship with them. I couldn't just leave things to kind of limp along, you know. And so for that reason too, I wanted to make sure that when they did start painting, it was with full support and it was with a plan for an exhibition, so that there was a sense of something launching, you know, with Papunya Tula's blessing and full support, you know.
And that was the first women's show that Papunya Tula had put together. This is the and this was in 1996.
Yes,
early
we're working up to it.
We're working. We are. We're following the the timeline very nicely. So in 1996 is when these women appear on the books for the first time at Papunya Tula. But with the women's exhibition as a motivation to paint to you know, to work towards. Is that correct in saying that?
Well, in my mind it was. I think we probably said, I say we because Paul Sweeney started work with us, I think mid-96. So he was with me on those first workshops, those trips. So I think we had a clear sense of this is where it's going, and we probably said to the women, let's start out small. Kind of like, sorry, but we have to start small, because I did feel like I had to negotiate something gradual with Daphne, and that we'll see how those first paintings are, and then we'll you know.
So, and you say workshops, which is interesting. So, so that already has this sense of a like a collective. So how did the workshops? So where did were they in Kintore and was there a number of workshops?
Yes, it was.
With the smaller canvases.
Yes, that's right. Part of my bargaining strategy, we had a bunch of these art boards, you know, those little funny little canvas-coloured card. And I said, these are just sitting here, can I just take them out? So that then there were lots of those available, and I felt free that I could give them out to whoever was around and wanted them. So there was a first workshop in January 96. And I took those, and then I think I also had small canvases, and there were some other larger canvases. So that first one was at Kintore, and it was in the old store shed thing. You're familiar with
painting
that?
Shed?
Yes, which had a certain atmosphere, right? Didn't it? So it was fairly dim, and it was fairly dusty, because it just had breeze block windows down one side, up high, and it wasn't a big space. And once we kind of let it be known that's what we were doing, women just came from everywhere, and that space was full of women working on these little canvases, and then gradually some bigger ones. And Paul gave me a list of the women who we saw in those two workshops, that one and a later one at Kiwirrkurra, and there were 28 women altogether. 28
women, yeah, because that's a lot of women. 28 is a lot.
The energy in the room.
Yeah.
That's my strongest memory probably, is just that sense of the dynamic sort of energy in the room, and the buzz and the eagerness of women. So once the word got out, women just kept coming. I think some women actually came from Kiwirrkurra as well during those few days, because they'd heard about it. So, you know, it was a sort of progression from the little boards, and then we'd look at those and go, yeah, we'll give her another one, we'll give her another one. There were some artists who obviously we knew already would handle a bigger canvas. And so we did actually, I'm a little bit embarrassed about this now, but we did actually pair up Walungurru and Kiwirrkurra No. 2 and McKinty. and they worked on one, maybe two canvases together. And then fairly soon, McKenty made it known that she preferred to work on her own. Winchia and Junko worked together on canvases as well, and that went pretty damn well.
Oh yeah,
yes.
yeah.
A very powerful duo.
And so from those early workshops, those artists that really stood out to you, like McKenty Napanunka was always very different to everybody else.
She was.
I've seen the footage of her at the canvas painting collaborative workshops, and it was she was being, because her cataracts and she was the eldest, and but you know, she was being kind of bossed around for not doing it right because she was using a brush, and this is really wrong. It was quite interesting, but those collaborative canvases that they worked together. I think she worked with Nirupaya Nampajipa sometimes on some as well.
Yes, I heard that.
But yes, that sort of that kind of collaboration, like she was so different. I can't even imagine what those canvases would have looked like.
Certainly her voice didn't come through as clearly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I guess with those workshops too, the women, when they started painting, like they really did kind of take ownership of the studio and their studio practice, and that collectivity and that kind of that camaraderie and that companionship it's so interwoven into their work, isn't it? Did you want to just talk a little bit about that?
You know, it's hard to stop me talking about that because it was so magnificent. You know, I found that so enjoyable personally to be around that enthusiasm, that energy. And it was awesome, you know, in that sense of like you're awestruck, like what is going to happen next, and you know what is in the room actually, what's in the room, because the atmosphere in the studio was it was palpable, you know. I think the women were actually hungry to paint. I do believe that, and they were really doing a job, and so they were pretty intent. They were very, you know, on task. And there was also the singing and the joking and teasing and the commentary and the women talking about what they were doing, women talking about what other women were doing. So there's, you know, I don't know if I could identify it, especially not without language, but that sense of it being collaborative on a certain level, even when women were working on their own canvases. There's a vibe. There's something in the room which seemed to be about confirmation, challenge, checking, supporting. Yeah.
That's right. It was very rarely quiet in those studios with the women. And I think the men went, oh, we're not painting here, this is too noisy now. And then they would move out. And they did take over. But there was always laughing, always joking, always, you know, yelling at kids or whatever, or just, you know, chatting over there and singing. And like one person would start singing and then another. The energy is just, it was amazing.
You'd want to bottle it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and it's a bit like I'm a painter too, if you're painting with music playing and then you look at the painting without the soundtrack, it's only half the thing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I feel like that when I come in and look at these, like, love to hear the soundtrack.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. To talk about the exhibition that did happen, the first women's show. Do you want to just talk about that and the reception of that, and maybe some of the works that were in there?
Thanks. Yeah, we do have a complete list of works, but I haven't actually been able to cite it since we started talking. So I've seen some of the images from then. What I can say was it was basically a sellout show. From that one exhibition, that one workshop, and there's two workshops really, one in Kinto, one in Kiwirrkurra. There was enough work and more for a complete show at the Todd Street Gallery, and some left also for a second show hot on the heels of that one that Chris Hodges had at Utopia Gallery, I believe, in November '96. So it just was different. It was different from the men's work. It was perhaps in some ways less formal in terms of iconography and layout and stuff of the work. When I look back at the photos now, I think, oh, some of them are kind of rough, you know. We didn't know where they were going.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
They were going somewhere. And I think that we should have mentioned too that there was another part of the context was that the public were curious about what women would do. And so there was also a hunger on the part of the art-loving public for what this show would be like. So it landed in a fertile ground, really, I think. People were ready for it in some way. And especially the fact that Margie West came from Magnet and bought the 2 largest works for Magnet just gave me the sense that there's a real affirmation from the public as well as from within the company of the women's work. And it's like, now there's no turning back. I felt so relieved and gratified about that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's interesting that the rough works now are just, like this is a really wonderful art form. Like the rougher, the better in a way.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is really interesting. But I mean, there was sort of some talk, or maybe about what the men not wanting the women to paint, or coming from the men, but that wasn't the case.
It was so not the case. No, I think that was a masking story as well, a little bit, like masking Daphne's reluctance, basically. So she thought that they would be so hungry for support that the company would drown. It was not the case. But fortunately, it was the case that they were really enthusiastic. Yeah. So she had always, I think preferred working with the men. But I think once it was obvious that this was going to enable the company to sort of, in a way, turn around and have like a second life, then she was really behind the women at that stage. Yeah.
And the men were obviously proud of the women to come on as Papunya Tula Artists and then help elevate the company, I guess. With that
I was really careful about actually checking with all of the board. So I spoke to, Long Jack and Namarari and Turkey Tolson and so on, just one by one, just checking if they're okay. They were all okay with it, very positive about it. And why wouldn't you be, even just in terms of resources for families, it was like more opportunities. Maybe more famous painters, more income, and just more kind of the sense of that painting of being out in the world.
Absolutely.
What's not to love about it?
Of course.
I didn't see any jealousy. I didn't at all.
Yeah.
The men did keep room at that stage anyway. They would be watching through the breeze blocks or through the door, but not so much coming. I mean, you couldn't really get in anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when the Papunya Tula art studio was rebuilt in 2007. It's interesting that the women's side was really big and the men's side was not as big. I mean, it was so it shows like the women that like
more present.
Yeah, well, and also just really wanting to be together. So there was there was space in the next iteration of their studio physically to accommodate the women. So there was the women's side and then the men's side, because the men were like, we're not sitting over there, it's just too noisy. We want our own space over here. And a lot of them did want, like painting alone. I mean, they do paint alone. And I guess, just going back to Daphne's preference for working with the men, you can really sense there's a completely different way. It's just two very different ways of working. The women, it is a much more kind of visceral, like it's a different experience, I suppose, rather than this quiet kind of way of working.
That's right.
Or that sort of that individual one-on-one sort of thing. Possibly.
It's interesting to think, isn't it? The men were often working at home on the verandas, and if there were women working with them, that would be like a little working group. So in a sense, that would be collective, right?
Yes.
But true. Not so much up at the art shed.
Yeah.
And I also sometimes wonder whether those women who continued to be painting with their men, like George Drumarai's family, say, even Turkey's family to some extent, whether they were slower to come into the group of women or didn't at all. Yes.
No, that's interesting. And so not long after the women's show, then you moved from Papunya Tula?
Yes, I had to leave because of family reasons mainly. It would have been so hard to leave had that show not happened. But I felt like, it was just tremendously exciting to see that something had begun and that it was just there was so much energy for it and so much affirmation, and it was taking off. So I was really sad to leave, mainly because at that time, if you weren't in a working role, it was hard to just visit communities. So I lost touch with people that way. Yeah. But so Wayne Eager had started as a field worker before I left. We hired him, and he and Paul could go out, and then there was a turn in the company's operations so that there were field workers more frequently out there, in fact most of the time, in the communities. And I think that made a huge difference as well. You know, when I started, there would be long spaces between when you would be there with the painters, and perhaps in a way they were working more independently. I think that it did begin to open out more in terms of creative practice. That it was wonderful having Iggy on board, because as a painter, I think he was more fearless about what might come out. And that sense of constraint and repetition, which I had perceived early on, I think that loosened up a bit there. And I just really need to acknowledge the collaborative nature of that art practice in terms of including non-Indigenous art workers as well. That it's not so much talked about as it should be, I think, but the things that happen in those studios, they're incredibly collaborative. The results are the results of relationships.
Absolutely.
You know.
So I just wanted to thank you so much, really, for coming and sharing your time there, because it's a really important part of Australian art history, and one that's not as well written about, and the scholarship around the women's practice isn't as extensive as the men's practice. The Papunya Tula boards, the 1971, 1972, incredibly important. So many books about that time, and of course, like, it is, you know, related in some way, in ways, of course. And as far as the Western Desert Movement, but the women have a really wonderful story, and their path is one to be told in depth, I think. So thank you so much for enlightening.
Thank you for inviting me to speak with you about it. One last thing I think is that lovely saying, everything's relational. And I think you bring something into the situation, it changes things.
Yes.
In fact, it changes everything.
No, it's true.
And so we look at all of the factors that existed at that time, the way they came together to support the women to start painting.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I just feel like I want to honour all of those, that breadth of context.
Yeah.
Like,
No, definitely, it's worth honouring. But you're right, it is relational. You know, you come, you're there, and then you leave, but then there is an impact, and it is lasting. And this is, you know, it happens. Like, the artists, people come in, but there's a lot of factors that can happen at the time when really big things happen, like for the women to actually, like, to start their movement, I suppose, within a broader movement, I suppose. Anyway, thank you so much, Jenny. Really,
very
I've
welcome.
loved talking.
Thank you.